When a 12-year-old girl is murdered in her home, attention quickly turns to her older brother. However, do police have the right suspect? This is the Stephanie Crowe story. Hi, Meghan.
Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
How was Benson Boone?
Oh, it was so good. It was so good. Not as good as Taylor Swift, but it was up there. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I heard he's quite a performer.
And he's a baby. He's 23 years old.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, no, he's cool. He is does flips and he's he has great energy. Yeah, he's super cool. Yeah, it was fun.
It's really fun. I'm glad you got to go. And I know you're probably tired today, but I'm glad you showed up.
Yes, I did show up. Here we are. You know this case, I'm assuming?
I do know this case, yes.
Okay. You don't know everything, though. I can promise you that.
I never do.
And actually, as of many of my cases recently, this episode comes right from my syllabus. I don't know. Do you teach about this at all?
I assume this is for your forensic psychology class, right?
Yes, I'm not going to give away the issue. Well, actually, this case illustrates various issues, but there's one in particular that I use a video to highlight something really important that I teach. And actually, I originally heard of this case in grad school when I was taking a class on wrongful convictions.
Oh, I didn't realize it was even that old.
Hey.
No, no, I didn't mean it like that. I meant it like...
You're older than me.
No, I meant it like... I always thought it was a more recent case.
Yeah,
it still seems so recent to me, but...
There have been many recent develops. No, not many, but there have been some very recent developments. So maybe that's why you're thinking of it. I've actually shied away from covering this case, although it's been on my radar for a while, because it contains violence against children. Well, and it contains violence against a child. And, these types of cases are really hard for both of us. And they're also hard for our listeners. But it's still important to discuss. There's so many issues in this case that cause life-altering errors to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I do want to give an extra trigger warning today because we will be discussing a child victim.
Okay.
That being said, let's go ahead and meet Stephanie. Stephanie Crowe was born on July 27th, 1985 in Escondido, California. Family and friends describe Stephanie as a bright, kind, and artistic young girl with a strong interest in drawing, writing, and the arts. She also enjoyed journaling and was a really excellent student. Her teachers found her to be curious and introspective. Stephanie was also very close to her family, especially her younger sister, Cheryl. 12-year-old Stephanie lived with her mother, her father, her older brother, Michael, who was 14, and her younger sister, Cheryl, who was 9. Their grandmother was also visiting and staying overnight. Unbeknownst to the family, the night of January 20th, 1998, would be the last time that anyone would see Stephanie alive. She told her family goodnight around 10 p.m., and at 6:30 a.m. on the next morning, Stephanie's grandmother found her dead on her bedroom floor, only inches away from her door.
I didn't know her grandmother found her.
Yeah. She had been stabbed 9 times to the chest.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that either. Okay.
Yeah, blood was pooled around her body, and there were some small drops elsewhere in the room. She was also cold to the touch when she was found. Stephanie's father called 911 around 6:45 a.m., and you can hear the call online, and it is heartbreaking. Yeah. He is so clearly distraught, as any parent would be, finding their child like that.
I just can't even imagine.
I cannot imagine. And this one hit a little harder because, as you know, my daughter Jordan is the same age as Stephanie.
Yes, I figured.
Yeah. When investigators arrived, they quickly noted that there were no signs of forced entry and no signs of a struggle. Nothing seemed to be out of place or disturbed. So therefore, the attention quickly turned to the Crowes themselves. Now, the parents, grandmother, and Stephanie's siblings were all separated and interviewed. Their clothing was confiscated, and their bodies were examined for any signs of offensive wounds. And so far, this is what we would expect, right? Everyone should be separated, questioned, things should be confiscated. This is early on in an investigation. After questioning and examinations, which again are typical protocols for these types of cases, things took a bit of what I feel is an investigative turn. You see, police put the parents up in a motel while the 2 surviving children, again, 14 and 9, were taken to the county shelter for children. And they were not allowed to see their parents for, get this, 2 days.
Oh, gosh.
And again, just to look at this from both angles, they don't know who did this to Stephanie. They suspect it was someone in the home. So they want to keep the children safe because they don't know if it was one of the parents. But on the flip side, you have two children that are dealing with probably the most traumatic thing a child could deal with. And then they're being separated from their parents.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one. During this time, police interviewed both children. And unbeknownst to their parents, they interviewed both children. Now, my first reaction here was that I'm pretty sure this isn't legal. But then I thought, well, maybe it is. So I did a little research to try to understand if and when police can talk to a minor without even informing the parents. So what I learned is that in general terms, police can interview children without a parent present. But like everything else, the rules and limits around this vary drastically depending on the jurisdiction. And not only the jurisdiction, but the circumstances, such as the child's age and the context of the interview.
Is it because they're possibly like eyewitnesses that they can interview them and not suspects, or that doesn't matter?
Well, it could matter. So police can approach and speak with a child in public without a parent present. So, for example, if they're at a school or on the street, they can approach your child without a parent present. Now, the child is not required to answer. The child could walk away. But do you think children know they have these rights? Probably not.
Right.
Some school districts allow police to interview students without parental notification, especially if the child is a witness and not a suspect.
Okay.
So again, as you mentioned, was it because maybe they were eyewitnesses? But again, policies vary by state and district. And in some jurisdictions, older children, especially teens, may be considered capable of consenting to an interview without a parent present. Again, Michael was 14. Cheryl was 9.
9?
Yeah.
A 9-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the rules do change across the board if the child is in police custody and being interrogated as a suspect, because then constitutional protections apply. Now, in the U.S., under Miranda rights, a child must be informed of their rights. And many states do require that a parent or guardian be present. But there are some states that still merely require that the child understand and voluntarily waive their rights. I don't know that a child can understand. I guess it depends on the child.
I don't think
most states would say that very young children, which is typically under 13, are not considered capable of waiving their rights knowingly and voluntarily.
I don't think children even older than that are, to be quite frank, but
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I can tell you, though, that many courts do often view interrogations without a parent or a lawyer as coercive in these types of cases. So even if they do happen, courts have acknowledged. Just a few state differences that I just want to highlight just to show the disparity. So in California, children under 17 must consult with legal counsel before a custodial interview. And this is even if they waive their rights.
That's great.
Yeah. And then in Illinois, you have the requirement of parental notification for minors under 18 in custodial situations. And then lastly, in Texas, police must notify a parent if a child is taken into custody, but not necessarily before questioning the child.
Okay.
So let's get back to Stephanie's case. I just thought it was interesting when I fell down that rabbit hole. I was like, our listeners probably would want to know about this. And it was something I didn't know about, so it's good to know. Okay, so in Stephanie's case, the police began to focus on Michael Crowe, Stephanie's older brother, again, only 14 at the time. After being brought to the children's shelter, Michael was brought to the police station several times for questioning. No attorney and no knowledge of his parents. Now, he was technically read his Miranda rights, but the interrogation violated his constitutional rights because he does end up confessing.
Wait, but why does that violate his constitutional rights?
Because given his age, his mental state, and the psychological tactics used. So this is kind of just like a little teaser. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So I'm kind of teasing what's to come.
You're saying it violated his constitutional rights because it was coerced? So
it was coercive because of his age and his mental state. And
Okay.
And there were psychological tactics that were used that many would argue should not be used on a child.
Yeah, okay.
Before we go forward, let's back up a little. Why were the police so interested in Michael to begin with?
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I didn't really remember.
So aside from initial evidence pointing to it looking like an inside job, Michael was described as, quote, distant and preoccupied after Stephanie's body was discovered. So people first on the scene said that the rest of the family grieved, while Michael did not seem to be grieving. Okay. I know how you feel about this.
Yeah.
And they also went on to say that during his initial interview at the house, he was acting, quote, strange, sitting quietly and playing with a video game.
I mean, his sister was just murdered. I don't
In
know
his
how he's
home.
supposed to act, but okay.
In his home, nonetheless.
Yeah.
And I think our listeners are going to be annoyed to hear me say this because we say it so often, but you cannot judge people's affect, especially a 14-year-old who just had his sister murdered in his home. If he wants to disassociate, it's probably healthy for him to be sitting there playing video games.
I don't know if it's healthy, but no, I understand your point.
Yeah.
It's like a self-protection.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that kind of started this narrative. So this only got worse during the interrogation because police falsely informed Michael that they had physical evidence that implicated him.
I really hate that police can lie during interrogations.
Yes.
It really bothers me.
Yeah, so this was and is still legal, and it's used often. And I have to say, in my most recent class, my forensic psychology class this past summer, I'd probably say the most shocking thing my students learned were that the police are able to lie to you. And I would say it's probably one of the most practical. Because if you or a friend or a family is in an interrogation and you don't know that the police are allowed to lie to you, that's going to change the course of what's to come. Now, they also informed Michael that he had failed an examination with a so-called truth verification device. Have you ever heard of a truth verification device?
I mean, it's not a polygraph.
Similar to a polygraph, but they actually, the way they do it is it's almost like analyzing the inflection in your voice.
Yeah. Okay, yes, I have heard of it, yeah.
They also told Michael that his parents were convinced that he killed his sister.
Oh my gosh.
After an intense, emotionally taxing 6-hour interrogation, Michael, again, 14-year-old Michael, gave a vague confession about killing his sister. Now, he gave no specific details, and he still said on record many times that he could not remember doing it. Actually, at one point in the videos, because they were recorded, Michael can be heard saying, "I'm only saying this because I know it's what you want to hear."
Oh.
These interrogations are so hard to watch, and I often show clips of them in my class as an example of an awful interrogation.
There was a movie, too, right? The Interrogation of Michael Crowe?
Yep.
I think I watched that.
Yes.
I know I watched that. Sorry. I know.
Yeah. And I'd like to point out that Michael wasn't the one and only suspect in this case.
Oh. Who else was a suspect?
Well, the morning of Stephanie's murder, police also interviewed a man named Richard Raymond Tewitt. He was a 28-year-old transient who had been seen in the Crowe's neighborhood the night before Stephanie was killed. Now, he was seen knocking on doors and looking in people's windows, and this caused several neighbors to call the police reporting a suspicious person.
You're kidding me. I don't remember this. Okay.
This guy also had a lengthy criminal record, and he habitually wandered the streets of Escondido, and he was diagnosed as schizophrenic.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So the police questioned him. They confiscated his clothing. They noticed he had scrapes on his body and a cut on his hand. However, they ruled him out as a suspect simply because they said that he was incapable of murder.
What?
I don't even know what that means, because why would a 14-year-old boy be seen as more capable of murder than this man?
But are they just saying he didn't have the mental capacity? Is that what they're saying? Or the physical capacity?
I'm not quite sure, but for some reason, they decided that they would not go forward with Richard and Michael Crowe as their prime suspect.
Oh, man. This is what happens with tunnel vision.
I was just going to say, this is a prime example of tunnel vision and confirmation bias. And I did have a student say to me in class, if I had $1 for every time you brought up confirmation bias. And I was like, sorry, I guess I repeat myself.
Yeah, well, it's the topic you cover. You kind of have to.
I mean, on this podcast also, how often do we talk about tunnel vision and confirmation bias?
But it's relevant, so.
It's so relevant here because the police were laser focused on Michael. Now they had a confession on the books, so they had really all they needed, and they arrested Michael and charged him with murdering his younger sister.
Oh my gosh.
But the police weren't done because they were convinced that Michael had help.
But they thought his parents helped him?
Nope. They thought his friends helped him.
Oh, was there a sleepover?
No, this is even... So Michael's coerced confession implicated his friends. So after hours of intense manipulative questioning, Michael eventually said, falsely, that he might have killed his sister, but maybe he just didn't remember doing so. He also mentioned his two friends, suggesting that they might have been with him or involved.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
this led police to their theory of what happened. The police believed that these boys had a pact. These detectives convinced themselves that 3 teenage boys working together made more sense than one child acting alone, or even worse, one transient, dangerous man with a criminal history working alone.
This is disturbing.
So police started questioning 2 of his friends. This would be Joshua Treadway and Aaron Hauser, both 15 years old. And you'll see why these 2 boys got dragged into it.
Okay.
So for one, Aaron, he had a collection of knives, one of which was reported missing by his parents. And it ended up being found at Joshua's house. So Joshua got brought into this as well.
I remember this now. Okay. I forgot, but I remember.
Okay. So one question, Joshua said that he had taken it from Aaron. So now police interrogated Joshua. Actually, they interrogated 15-year-old Joshua from 9 p.m. until 8 a.m. the next morning without any breaks at all.
Whoa.
They told him that they said his knife was the murder weapon. He adamantly denied it. They interrogated him again about 2 weeks later. This time it was a 10-hour interview, which unfortunately ended in him giving a detailed confession to participating in the murder with 2 other boys.
Oh, my gosh.
So then at this point, Joshua was arrested and Aaron was brought in, although Aaron also adamantly denied any involvement in the murder. Now, he did not confess like the other 2 boys, but he presented what's known as a hypothetical account of how the crime might have happened.
Is that because the police asked him to? Because sometimes I know they do that as well. Like, well, what do you think could have, happened? Or how do you think this, something kind of, I've heard these scenarios.
Yep. This hypothetical account was given after interrogators used what's known as the Reid technique.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And we've probably discussed this before. I teach about it. I'm assuming you do as well. Okay.
Yes.
So very briefly, for those of you who have not been in one of our classes or who have not heard one of our earlier episodes, the Reid technique was developed in the 1940s by John E. Reid, and it basically consists of a 3-phase process. Now, it's supposed to begin with what is known as a behavior analysis interview, also known as a BAI. This is essentially a non-accusatory, fact-gathering interview to assess whether or not a suspect may be lying based on verbal and nonverbal cues. Kind of think like good cop, bad cop, maybe some rapport building. And this is okay. I think this is how an interview should start. However, this then transitions to accusation if deception is suspected. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, Meghan, but fun fact, we cannot judge deception really any better than chance.
No, I do know that. Yeah.
And research has shown that trained investigators and police are no better than your average college student at picking up cues of deception.
Yes. What class was it that? Oh, I think it was, I've covered it before, but I remember like really focusing on this in the psychology course in our PhD program. So
yeah, so that's why I teach it in forensic psych. We focus a lot on it. Now, the problem is now the interview becomes accusatory. This is when the officer or investigator starts expressing certainty of guilt, even and often without any proof to back that up.
Right.
Then comes the 9-step interrogation process.
Right.
I'm going to quickly go through it because I think it's interesting. I won't spend time on each one because there's so many steps. But basically, it starts with isolating the suspect, then confronting them with alleged evidence, real evidence, but oftentimes it could be real, but oftentimes it's also just implied or made up. Then there's minimization. This is when, the investigator might say, anyone would have done the same thing. You must have been tired. You must have been angry, making the person feel as though what they did was okay. Lots of cutting off denials. You could see that in Michael's interrogation videos. Offering 2 choices. So both will often imply guilt. So this could be like, you either did this because you were angry or because you were provoked. So it's almost like minimization in a way, but also adding in 2 potential reasons why somebody did something.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of repetition of themes until the suspect confesses. And practically every one of these tactics can be seen in the interrogation videos of Michael.
Oh, yeah.
And although widely used to this day, it is so controversial because it can and has led to many, many false confessions.
Right.
And the technique can coerce innocent people, especially vulnerable individuals, like younger people, people with disabilities, maybe people under extreme stress, people under the influence. These are individuals that are going to be more likely to confess to crimes they didn't commit when there's the use of these deceptive practices.
Right.
Okay, so as we've discussed, it seems pretty clear that the boys' confessions are problematic. But what would the legal system say? Because it doesn't matter what we think.
Right. Right.
Well, to some degree, the legal system agreed with our assessment. Now, at the time of the trial, because this case did go to trial, all three boys recanted their statements claiming coercion during the interrogation process. And on a legal level, the majority of Michael's confession was later ruled as coerced by a judge because investigators implied to Michael that they would talk to the district attorney and recommend leniency.
If he confessed?
Yes. So while lying is okay, there are some things that investigators cannot lie about in certain
They're not allowed
states.
to make false promises, right?
Correct.
Of leniency, yeah.
Correct. In some states. Some states they can.
Oh, okay.
But the judge ruled in this case that made it coercive. I would argue that there were many other factors of this interview that made it coercive, but at least the court noticed a problem here.
Yeah, for sure.
They also found issue with Joshua's confession because he confessed twice. First to detectives in one jurisdiction, and then an identical confession to detectives in another jurisdiction. So the court ruled that the confessions were redundant and ordered that the first be suppressed. I actually never heard of this before.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for some reason, they said that one of the confessions was admissible, but the other wasn't. Seems like a strange ruling to me, but it wouldn't be kind of the crux of the case. Aaron's statements, remember, Aaron's was not an actual confession. It was like that hypothetical one.
Right.
His statements to police were suppressed because police did not sufficiently advise him of his Miranda rights. So basically all three interviews found there were issues found in all three, but just different types of issues.
But they allowed the one confession by one boy, the full confession, to go.
They did, and they also had other evidence. So despite all of this, all three were still charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder. And furthermore, a judge ruled that they should all be tried as adults.
That was going to be my question, too, if they were going to be waived into criminal court. So they're 14, and they're trying them as adults.
14, 15, right? 15. Yep.
14, 15, 15. Yes. I had a feeling that was coming, too, even though I said I remembered this case, which I clearly don't remember this case, or I don't remember all these
That's why, anything
details
we cover, we always think we know the case, but there's so many details when you do a deep dive that, we never know everything.
No, and I have it coupled with the fact that I have the worst memory ever. I'm just so they're waived into adult court. Okay.
Yes. And they were all held without bail for 6 months as prosecutors prepped for trial, which is actually pretty quick because most trials, I think, would take closer to a year or more. But still, 6 months is a long time to keep these boys.
Yeah, it's a long time. Oh, man. How traumatic. Okay. And I was thinking about his parents, too. His poor parents as well, losing their daughter, and then they lose their son on top of it. Oh, gosh.
And they absolutely never believed he was guilty, not for a second.
No, of course not, yeah.
Just as Joshua's trial was beginning to start in January of 1999, belated DNA testing found 3 drops of Stephanie's blood on a shirt belonging to none other than the suspect that police had disregarded, and that would be the transient Richard Tuitt.
I did not remember that at all. Wow.
Yeah.
Wait, what? So what happened then? I mean, were they okay?
So luckily, based on this new evidence, the charges against the boys were dismissed, but dismissed without prejudice, which means that charges could be reinstated against the boys at a later date if the prosecutor chose to do so.
So this whole time they had evidence. Did they run that DNA? I wonder if they ran that DNA early on. And it just took a long time, or they had. Okay, I'm sorry.
It's possible. Again, it was only 6 months, and with DNA backlog, and this was a long time ago.
And DNA wasn't as advanced then, so wow.
Yeah.
So they really did identify the perpetrator. I didn't know that they. Oh gosh. Okay.
So all 3 boys were sent home, but not knowing whether or not they'd be recharged. Meanwhile, the case was stalled for 2 years. And it was also sent to the federal court at some point, which could be why there were so many delays. But
Why?
in May of 2002, 5 years after the murder, the Attorney General charged Richard Tuitt with Stephanie Crowe's homicide. But get this, an additional 2 years would pass before he was actually put on trial.
So 7 years from when she was. Why? Why did it go to the federal system? Is this appeals or something? Or
honestly, I don't
there was
know.
no appeals, but
Yeah, I tried to find that information. It was a little difficult for me to find. I couldn't quite understand why it went to the federal court. It was a state level case. I'm not sure at what point or why it went to the federal court.
I wonder if there's just like some proceedings. I don't get it. Okay.
Yeah. So in February of 2004, the prosecution linked Tuitt to Stephanie's killing by presenting both circumstantial and physical evidence, including perhaps the biggest piece of evidence, which was Stephanie's blood on his clothing.
Yeah.
In addition, you had multiple neighbors who reported seeing him wandering around the family's neighborhood the night Stephanie was killed. Some even reported that he appeared disoriented as he was knocking on doors. He was also known to roam the area frequently, and he had a history of breaking into homes.
I don't see why he wasn't the more likely suspect. But I guess that you said there was no forced entry, or they couldn't find forced entry.
I think that is what they were hinging on, is the fact that they thought it was an inside job. So the fact that Richard didn't live in the home was enough for them to not consider him. But that's not all. He also had a history of paranoid schizophrenia, and he was known for erratic, sometimes aggressive behavior. And on the actual night of Stephanie's murder, people described him as acting strangely.
It seemed like there was a lot of evidence pointing to him, but I wouldn't want the reason people presumed it was him to be because he was a known schizophrenic. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think the totality of what you're telling me does point to him, but
yeah,
it's also, when people round up the usual suspects, unfortunately.
I 100% agree with that. But I think, other than the fact of his, known instability, I think it was the presence in the immediate area, but more so, it's the DNA evidence that made him the logical suspect here.
Oh, no, for sure. I mean, I think he's the right person, but, and you said he had a known criminal history as well.
He did. We'll get to that when we talk about kind of like the discussion and where he is now.
Okay.
This part was really disgusting to me, but we've seen this as a defense tactic. Do you want to guess what Richard's defense was? Or who they were saying committed the crime?
I assume that they were just pointing the finger back at Michael or the family.
Unbelievable. The defense argued that the three boys had killed Stephanie and that the reason why her blood was on Richard's clothing was because of cross-contamination by careless police work.
I mean, that's all the defense. What's the defense going to be unless it's is really the truth? Unless, was there ever an insanity defense raised?
Not that I'm aware of. That doesn't mean it wasn't raised, but...
No, okay. It sounds like he was going for outright innocence, but okay.
Yeah. All right, so there's still some more shocks to come.
Oy.
On May 26, 2004, the jury acquitted Richard of murder, but convicted him of the lesser included offense of voluntary manslaughter and the use of a deadly weapon, which is a knife.
I wonder why.
Well, I think what happened was, to convict him of murder, the prosecution needed to prove premeditation, that he had intended to kill Stephanie. Well, actually, premeditation and deliberation was hard to prove here.
I see. Yes,
because
they got it.
Because the jury may have believed that he killed her, but there was a lack of any evidence to say not only that he had planned to do it or that he intended to do it. And, since he was a mentally ill transient and the defense emphasized his erratic, disorganized behavior, this actually suggested that the killing was likely not premeditated.
Right. I believe
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, no, I believe that could be true, yeah.
So the trial court sentenced Richard Tuitt to 13 years in prison, with 4 more years added onto the sentence due to an escape attempt during jury selection. Now get this.
Oh my gosh.
During jury selection, he was being held, obviously, he was in jail. He freed himself from the handcuffs and boarded a bus. He just kind of walked away from the courthouse.
What?
Yes. Luckily, he was apprehended a few hours later. But how does that happen? We've heard that sometimes. It just seems like the way I picture it, too, is he was just like, doop, doop, took him off, walked out, got a bus, and was on his way.
I mean, I've heard of people like, I think it was Bundy jumped out the window.
Yes.
Yeah, but just walking out, I don't know, freed yourself of handcuffs and just walked out. Okay.
So there's more still. So Richard Tuitt appealed his conviction to the California Court of Appeal, raising several claims, including that his Sixth Amendment rights were violated because he was precluded from fully cross-examining a prosecution witness. The court agreed here, finding that the trial judge had committed a constitutional error limiting cross-examination. However, what do you want to guess? They ruled the error to be
harmless.
Harmless, yes, and affirmed the conviction.
Do you know who the prosecution witness was?
I don't know.
Okay.
Mm-mm. And, it's been a while since we discussed one of our favorite legal terms of harmless error.
Yes.
We used to bring it up all the time.
Yes.
Right? For those of you who haven't been listening long enough to have heard our rants about harmless error, it's basically the idea that the court is saying, yes, that isn't right, what happened. However, but for that error, the person would have still been found guilty. So there's enough other evidence. And we talked about this ad nauseum in the Melanie McGuire case.
We did, yeah.
Okay, so his appeal to the Supreme Court of California was also denied, and the federal district court denied his petition for habeas corpus.
Mm-hmm.
But on September 8th, 2011, a panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit voted 2-1 to overturn his manslaughter conviction, ruling that the trial was unfair because the trial judge limited cross-examination of a prosecution witness. So he was granted a retrial.
How long had he been in prison at that time? So he wasn't. He was tried 7 years after. So he must have been in prison because that would be like 2005, 2006. He must have been in prison for about 5 years by that time.
Yeah, and the second trial began in October of 2013.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh.
And the defense argued that Richard had never been in the Crowe house. He wouldn't have been able to find Stephanie's bedroom because the home was dark. They also claim that investigators didn't find his fingerprints or DNA evidence in the home. They also brought in experts to testify that the bloodstains on his shirt were not there when those shirts were originally evaluated, and therefore they got there through cross-contamination during crime scene analysis.
Whoa.
And then you had the prosecutors who countered with the main argument that Tuitt was in the area, the night that Stephanie was killed. He was seen knocking on doors, and they also presented evidence that he was looking for a woman named Tracy who he was angry with. I guess she had turned him down or something for romantic advances. They also explained that he was obsessed and delusional, and he wandered into the Crowe's home around 10 p.m. through an open door, which is why there was no forced entry, because the door was left unlocked.
I wonder, that could happen, certainly. I wonder in the interviews with the family if, they acknowledged that they could have left the door open. That would have been interesting to know. It happens.
Yeah.
We've certainly done it accidentally, in the past. So,
yeah.
Yeah, what a shame.
Although they couldn't say exactly what happened once he was in the home, the prosecution said he got in the home, found his way to Stephanie's bedroom, stabbed her at least 9 times, and her blood was found on 2 shirts that he was wearing when the police found him the next day. Ready for this?
Oh, gosh, you're going to tell me the jury acquits him.
On December 5th of 2013, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty.
Wow. Well,
and he was a free man.
I never knew. So I did not know this follow-up at all. Mm-hmm. Oh, my goodness. So he probably served about 8 years for her murder.
So he was released. And I don't think you'll be surprised to know he continued to commit crimes over the next couple of years. Now, he was also registered as a sex offender, and this was prior to Stephanie's murder.
So I was going to ask if there was a sexual assault, but since you didn't bring it up, I assumed it was not.
Yeah, because it wasn't really, there wasn't a big focus on it. I'm surprised. I don't know if, it was ruled inadmissible for some reason.
No. I didn't mean him, his prior. I meant I was going to ask if Stephanie was sexually assaulted, but when you didn't bring it up, I assumed...
there's no evidence of that.
I didn't think so.
Most of the crimes that he committed were low-level misdemeanor drug crimes and also trespassing. The last one I found, at least publicly, was in 2021, that he was arrested for trespassing.
Oh, my goodness.
And though her case is not actually still open, to date, no one has been convicted of murdering Stephanie Crowe. Her brother, Michael, and his 2 friends had their charges permanently dismissed by a judge in 2012, with a Superior Court judge's ruling that all 3 young men were factually innocent.
Thank goodness they actually had that, but 14 years later, oh my gosh.
I know. And the family of all 3 of the boys sued the cities of Escondido and Oceanside.
I hope they won.
The Crowes reached a settlement of $7.25 million in 2011.
Good.
I'm not sure what the other family settled as. And from what I could find, Michael currently has a family and lives in Oregon, which I would say is a wonderful place to live. Have you been there yet?
No.
Oh, to go.
I know.
I might like it more than Colorado.
I know. You remember you telling me that.
It's incredible.
That's such a heartbreaking story. It really is.
Okay. I know. So obviously, we don't have to say, did the system get it right? They didn't get it right, I think, on many levels. But I want to turn my attention to what's known as an internalized false confession. So basically, there's 3 types of false confessions. You have a coerced confession, which is typically given after someone is promised reward, leniency, or after they're just interrogated to the point where they break down. Right. So usually you would see this after many hours of interrogation. And then you have a voluntary false confession. Doesn't happen often, but you could see that. I think the best example is like JonBenet Ramsey case. How, was it John Mark Carr? Is that his name?
I think so. Yeah.
So a voluntary false confession is when someone without any prompting from the police voluntarily confessed to something. And usually it's due to mental illness or the need for attention or an obsession or, obsession with notoriety or an obsession with the case. And then the last one is an internalized false confession. And that's what we see in Michael's case. That's basically when the police convince you that you actually did something. So you start to actually believe you did it. Now, this happens most often with vulnerable populations, such as younger children. Again, his interrogation was so long. He was grieving. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a family member. When you watch the interrogations, you could see that at some point he actually says, if you're saying I did it, I must have done it.
Isn't that what happened with Marty Tancliffe?
I don't remember. I know it's a false confession case, but I don't recall. It might have.
I thought he started to believe it as well. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And in the interrogation, they say to him, there's a good Michael and there's a bad Michael. The good Michael would never kill his sister, but the bad Michael. And so he starts saying, like, maybe the bad Michael, I have no memory of this, but maybe the bad Michael did it. So they, they kind of convinced him that that's what happened. And it's heartbreaking because he's having, like, I hate using the word mental breakdown because that's not like a clinical term, but I don't know a better way to describe how much agony this child is in. Yeah. He's grabbing his head. He's hysterical crying. And maybe we'll put a link to it on our YouTube channel just so people could see how horrific these interrogation tactics were on this child. Yeah. The only other thing I want to point out is, how much we can see tunnel vision and confirmation bias in this case. The police had a theory very early on. Their theory was that it happened in the house because there was no signs of forced entry. Because they were so focused on their initial theory, they ignored the possibility of anything else, which is why they had their primary suspect, and their primary suspect slipped through their fingers so early on because they were convinced it had to be somebody in that family.
Right. So the Reid technique, you said it's still... Is it still widely accepted, or is it, as I understand it, it's not so widely practiced or the same way? I think after a number of wrongful convictions involving it, but it's still, you're saying some departments are still using the Reid technique as practice.
And, taking pieces from it. Maybe maybe some departments recognize that minimization isn't a great tactic, but they still lie or, they still isolate. So I think jurisdictions might pick and choose which ones they think are decent tactics for their interrogations.
Yes, I wonder if they actually got rid of the Reid technique in the jurisdiction in which Michael Crowe and his friends were wrongfully convicted. Sorry, not wrongfully convicted, but wrongfully charged.
Well, yeah, wrongfully charged. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wonder if they. I wonder if they revised. I hope they would have revised maybe their tactics, and I hope that this case was so important in demonstrating how dangerous some of these methods are, and how dangerous certain types of presumptive policing is. So I just I hope it's one where there was at least reform on the table.
Yeah. And also, sometimes you'll see civil suits that not only is there a settlement, like a financial settlement, there'll also be something about policy and procedure. So it's possible in the settlement that they agree that, these tactics can no longer at least be used on children. or maybe, that there needs to be an adult present.
Okay, I really hope that was. I'm so glad you brought that up because I forgot about that, and I
Mhm.
really hope that was part of the settlement here as well. I
Yeah.
hope it wasn't all in vain or all for
Yes.
nothing.
Yep. And if you are interested in learning more about these types of cases, such wrongful conviction types of cases, I would suggest going to the Innocence Network. It's the innocencenetwork.org. Basically, they're an informal coalition of independent innocence organizations. So, there's the New York Innocence Project, which is obviously where it all started. That's the biggest one. But there are so many other organizations around the country and even around the world that are dedicated to combating wrongful convictions and reforming the criminal legal system. If you go to that website, you can find all of the network organizations that provide legal representation to individuals who have been wrongfully convicted. And it's just a good website to kind of get information if you're interested in educating yourself more on some of these topics. All right, Meghan. Well, that's all we have for Stephanie's case. But before we go, we have 2 questions, one from a listener and one from a patron supporter.
Okay.
As women and mothers, how has your parenting been affected through the many years and cases that you've done where children are or were involved?
Oh.
All right. So my kids are a little older.
Mhm.
So I think our answers are going to be a little bit different. How has my parenting been affected? That's a really interesting question. I think it's probably opposite from what most people think. It hasn't made me more strict or more worried because I think I understand that, stranger danger is a myth. Children are more, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but children are more likely to be victimized by somebody close to them. And, I feel confident in my life, in my situation, that anyone who my children are close with, they're safe. So I feel like they're protected in that way. Has it made me more strict? That's hard to say. I mean, Jordan's approaching her teenage years. So I think I'll really get a good feel for it because at this age, she doesn't really do too many things independent. So I haven't had to really be too concerned about, letting her kind of go on her own. But I'm sure that as she starts hanging out with friends and being dropped off at places, I'll probably be having a lot of conversations with her. I've definitely spoken to her a lot about internet safety and, on the apps and stuff like that. Slowly, we've been giving her some social media. But I think my parenting has been affected in the sense that I know what red flags to teach her about, but I would imagine it'll change. And I think for my son, I think as he gets older, I'll be talking to him a lot about, consent and issues surrounding consent, because I think that's important for, I'm not saying that's not important for, male and females, but I do think obviously in today's society, boys and girls have kind of different things they need to contend with, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about you and your little nugget?
Well, yeah, Hannah's only 15 months now. I would say I'm probably going to be different than you because even though I know, this is kind of like me with flying. I know the realities. I know the statistics. But I'm still, I feel like I'll still be a little bit more paranoid. And I don't really mean paranoid, but I feel like I'm still going to be a little bit more scared, and I hope it doesn't mean that I am overprotective. I hope it means I'm cautiously protective.
Yes.
So, we'll
it's
see.
hard to know also, right?
Yeah.
Until we're
we'll
in the
see.
situation.
I'm sure she'll let you know when she's a little older how I do.
Yes. All right. Thank you for that question. It's a good one. Okay. That last question is, I just completed a master's in sociology with a focus in criminology, and I'm moving into leadership studies PhD program this fall. I'm thinking of examining leadership experiences and roles among formerly incarcerated people. What is your experience or perception of individuals who become leaders after incarceration?
First of all, I think that
question.
is so cool. I
Yes.
really do. Go ahead.
Yeah. And just to kind of close that out, the question was, how do you view this in terms of advocacy and business-oriented directions? I think I might have told you before, there's one of the most interesting organizations. It's called Defy Ventures. It's out of New York. I've applied for so many jobs there throughout the years. But basically what they do is they work with people coming out of prison and they prepare them for jobs in the business world by using the skills that put them in prison to begin with.
That's so
think
interesting.
think people that were working in like more like street crimes, not so much violent crimes, like people who are dealing drugs. And
I was just going to say, I'm thinking of drug dealing and all the industry that goes into that you could put into business. Yes.
Yeah. You have to be very savvy to be able to pull off a lot of what, people who commit crimes pull off. It's sometimes people think that, people who commit street crimes maybe aren't as intelligent. No, they are extremely intelligent and their skills can be tailored to make them very strong leaders, advocates, business people. Also, I just want to point out that anyone who's incarcerated is just a person the way anyone who's not incarcerated is, right? Mm-hmm. So, of course, you're going to have people that have better leadership skills naturally. Yeah. I think in prison, at least, when I work in prison, I'm working with the college students in prison, they all take a leadership role where they kind of mentor the younger people. Because a lot of my students are, in their 40s, 50s, 60s. I have a few in their 70s. Mm-hmm. And they admit that they weren't ready to turn their life around right away. Yeah. So they try to mentor the younger guys to let them know, like, I wish I got into these programs sooner, made more use out of my time. So I think leaders after incarceration is such an interesting topic. And I think there's a lot there.
I do too. I couldn't agree with you more. My experience has been the same, especially working with the guys from the Lifers group in East Jersey, because they've been there for so long. They really take, a lot of them take strong leadership roles and mentors. So yeah, I've seen clear evidence of that.
Yeah.
Awesome topic. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. Good luck. Keep us posted. I can't wait to see what you do your dissertation on. So interesting. And as always, if you have a question for us, feel free to message us at womenandcrimepodcast.com/contact. And if you're a patron at the Lifer tier, your question will be guaranteed to be read on air. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and we will catch you next time on Women and Crime.
Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonzo. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime.
Sources for today's episode include the San Diego Union Tribune, CBS, Office of the Attorney General, State of California Department of Justice, KPBS, Fox 5 San Diego, The Interrogation of Michael Crowe, and ABC News 10.